There are moments when the veil is pulled back, when the unseen realm intersects with the world of men, and God reveals what is about to come. This is one of those moments. I was praying, crying out for mercy over a nation that once knew God, once walked in his ways, once honored his name. And in the midst of that prayer, I was shown something, a vision, a divine revelation, a shaking. God showed me a man, clothed in power, enthroned in influence, seated high on the seat of authority. His name was known, his face was familiar, his words shaped policies. And yet, God said, I did not place him there, and I will not keep him there. And I watched, as if in a dream, the hand of God move. And the man was removed, not by coup, not by scandal, not by vote, not by weapon, but by decree. The holy decree from the courts of heaven. Enough, said the Lord, his time is over. I was alone in prayer when it happened. The air was still, but something stirred in the spirit, something heavy, weighty, undeniable. It was as if the heavens opened for a moment, and I was allowed to see what is not normally seen, not a dream, not a thought, a vision. It came suddenly with force, like a trumpet in the night. Before me stood a man. I won't speak his name, not because I fear him, but because it is not about the man, it is about the revelation. He was robed in power, dressed in the garments of authority, surrounded by influence, upheld by thrones and systems, banners of strength all around him. He spoke, and the earth seemed to listen. His name echoed in the halls of power. His face appeared across screens and pulpits. He was praised, feared, followed, but something was wrong. I could feel it. Like a tremor under the surface of the earth, before the ground splits open. He was standing tall, but the foundation beneath him was cracking. He was speaking loudly, but the heavens were silent. He was wielding authority, but it was borrowed, and the lender had come to collect. Then I saw a hand, not a hand of flesh and bone, no human form. It was a presence, holy and terrible. It moved toward the man, not quickly, but with purpose, as if time itself had waited for this moment. There was no shouting, no force, just authority, absolute authority. And the moment the hand drew near, everything changed. The crown slipped, the robe loosened, the stage beneath him trembled, his words faltered, his eyes shifted. The man who once stood so sure, so elevated, began to fade, not disappear, fade, like mist before the morning light, like a shadow when the sun rises. I heard a voice, not booming, but clear. It said, he was never the source. He was never the power. I permitted, but I did not anoint. I allowed, but I did not bless. And now I remove. It was not rage. It was justice. It was not sudden to heaven, though it seemed sudden to earth. It was a reckoning written long ago. The time had come, and no counsel, no weapon, no strategy of man could stop it. Power was being taken. Authority was being stripped. The throne was not his. The breath was not his. The kingdom was not his. And I understood then, this was not political. It was spiritual. Not about a man, but about a moment. A divine interruption. A warning to all who would claim greatness without bowing to the great one. A revelation that God does not forget. That heaven does not sleep. That the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. And in that vision, the man did not fall because of a scandal, not because of an uprising, not because of a vote. He fell because heaven said enough, because the line had been crossed, because mercy had been offered and refused. There was no applause, no cheering, only silence, holy silence, because when God removes, it is not for entertainment, it is for awakening. And in that silence, I felt the fear of the Lord like a fire in my bones. And I knew I had seen something that was coming. Would you like me to continue with the next keynote section in the same style? The man who once stood exalted now wavered like a tree whose roots had been severed. The might he carried was not his own, but borrowed, permitted for a season, and the season had ended. Well, throughout the ages, there has been a mystery, a divine law written into the fabric of kings and kingdoms, rulers and empires, that no man rises without God's knowledge, and no man stands forever without his permission. The fall of the mighty is never as sudden as it appears. It is prepared long before. hidden faults beneath polished floors, decay beneath painted walls, pride that grows in silence until it demands a reckoning. I saw in that vision not just one man, but many, a procession of the powerful through the corridors of time. I saw Pharaoh, who defied the living God with hardened heart and drowned beneath the waves of the Red Sea. I saw Nebuchadnezzar, who declared himself as God over Babylon and was driven to madness until he crawled like a beast. I saw Herod, who received the praises of men, the voice of a god, not of a man, and was struck down and eaten by worms. These were not legends. These were warnings. And the man in the vision stood in their company, not in glory, but in consequence. Because when power is severed from humility, when a throne is taken as possession rather than stewardship, judgment follows. The mighty fall, not because of the strength of their enemies, but because of the weight of their pride. He had once walked in the fear of the Lord, or at least claimed to, but the fear had turned into presumption. He began to speak not as a servant, but as a sovereign, not as one accountable, but as one untouchable. And that is when the foundation began to crack, slowly, quietly, but relentlessly. What once appeared as strength was revealed as arrogance. What was admired by the world was repulsive to heaven. And still he stood, giving speeches, making decrees, rallying followers, until the final line was crossed. A moment known only to God, a threshold invisible to men, but once crossed, mercy is withheld and judgment begins. I saw a tower, tall, ornate, unshakable in appearance. It bore his name. It rose above the city like a monument to self, but inside there was rot, mold in the beams, cracks in the pillars, and the higher it rose, the more unstable it became, until the weight of it, its pride, its corruption, its defiance, became too much to hold, and then it collapsed. The mighty do not fall gently. When they fall, they shake nations. They expose what was hidden. They awaken those who slept, and they remind the world that there is only one true king who cannot be shaken, who does not fall, who will not yield his throne to another. Would you like to move to the next keynote? Signs before the shift? Before the fall came the signs. They were not always loud, not always obvious, but they were there for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. The ground does not crack without first trembling. The tree does not collapse without the leaves first withering. The throne does not empty without heaven first whispering through the winds of warning. It began quietly, a sense of unrest in the spirit, something out of place. What once felt secure began to feel fragile. The atmosphere shifted, not in politics, but in the unseen. Dreams became troubled. Watchmen began to speak, often ignored, often mocked, but their voices carried the ring of urgency. The nation's peace grew thin. There was confusion in leadership, decisions made without wisdom, a blindness, a stumbling as if the head no longer guided the body, but wandered in darkness. Then came the shaking in the streets, protests, uproar, fires, both literal and spiritual, people shouting but no one listening. Justice turned into conflict, truth twisted until no one could tell what was right and what was wrong. The ancient boundaries were removed. That which had always been sacred was trampled. That which had always been wrong was celebrated. There were calamities, natural, economic, social. The systems built on sand began to sway. Institutions once trusted became corrupted. Voices once clear became compromised. And still the man stood in power. Still the throne appeared unshaken. But it was a deception, because God does not strike without warning. He does not remove without first revealing. The signs were not the judgment, they were the mercy. The final calls to turn. There were cracks in the image, scandals not yet exposed, hidden sins waiting to be brought to light, whispers behind closed doors, secrets held by the very ones who praised him. The smiles of loyalty masked the schemes of betrayal. And yet he did not see it, or would not, because pride blinds the eyes of those who carry it. Even creation began to groan. Storms came in strange seasons, fires that would not be quenched, plagues that swept across the land. The heavens were declaring something. The earth was responding. Time itself seemed to accelerate, like a clock approaching its final chime. The people began to feel it, even if they couldn't name it. A heaviness, an unease, a sense that things could not continue as they were. Some turned to distraction, others turned to rage, but a few, just a remnant, turned to prayer. They saw the signs for what they were. They discerned the times. They knew that when the winds change, a storm is near. And then it came, subtle at first, but swift beneath the surface, the beginning of the end, the unraveling, not by hands of men, but by the will of heaven. Can now continue with a nation in rebellion. The man was only a symbol. His fall, though dramatic, was merely the symptom of something deeper, something older. The true crisis was not in a single throne, but in the heart of a nation. A people who had once walked with God now walked away. A land once dedicated to the Almighty now raised high the banners of self. The covenant was forgotten. The altars were abandoned. The laws of heaven were replaced with the opinions of men. This was not sudden. Rebellion never is. It starts with compromise, a subtle shift from righteousness to relevance, from truth to tolerance. What was once shameful became acceptable. What was once sacred became mocked. What was once light was now called darkness, and darkness praised as light. The conscience of the nation grew dull, then hard, then silent. And as the people drifted, the leaders followed, or perhaps they led. The foundations were being destroyed, but few noticed. The word was removed from schools, prayer banished from the public square. The very name of God became controversial, and yet his blessings were still demanded. The nation cried out for prosperity while rejecting the source. It sought security without submission, freedom without responsibility, favor without fear. And so, a vacuum opened, a spiritual emptiness at the heart of the people, and into that void came idols, not statues of stone, but gods of culture and pride, the idol of self above all, the idol of pleasure without consequence, the idol of power without accountability, the idol of identity without the Creator. They bowed to technology, to celebrity, to ideology, to self-definition. They no longer ask, is this right in God's eyes? But does this feel right to me? Prophets cried out in the wilderness, but their words were drowned out by applause for the rebellious. Watchmen blew the trumpet, but few responded. The judgments of God were explained away, the signs spiritualized or politicized, and those who warned were labeled dangerous, intolerant, hateful. The land had turned upside down and called it progress. Even the places meant to be holy were not untouched. Pulpits grew silent. The fear of man replaced the fear of God. Messages were shaped to please, to attract, to entertain. While sin was excused, righteousness avoided, and repentance forgotten, the salt had lost its savor. The light was dim, and still the people cheered. They crowned leaders who reflected their own hearts, not servants of God, but mirrors of the people's rebellion. And so the judgment was not unjust. It was righteous. Not cruel, but surgical. God was not punishing a man. He was revealing a nation. The leader's fall was only the echo of a louder silence, the silence of a people who had once pledged in God we trust, but now trusted only in themselves. Shall I continue with the God who lifts and lowers? There is a truth that kingdoms forget, a mystery that rulers overlook, a reality more ancient than any nation. It is not man who lifts himself up, but God who lifts up and God who casts down. Thrones rise not by accident, but by permission. Crowns are placed not by the wisdom of men, but by the will of heaven. It is the Most High who governs the heights and depths of history. He lifts up one and brings down another. This is not a theory, it is a decree. From the beginning of time, God has moved behind the scenes, unseen by the proud, unnoticed by the powerful, yet ruling all. He is not impressed by palaces, not swayed by policies, not manipulated by campaigns. His measure is not popularity, but purity, not charisma, but character, not ambition, but submission. And when he searches the heart and finds rebellion in the high places, he moves, not always suddenly, but always surely. The God who raised up Joseph in Egypt and brought Pharaoh to his knees is the same. The God who anointed David and removed Saul is unchanged. The one who humbled Nebuchadnezzar and shattered Babylon still rules. He does not change with the times, for he made time. He is not subject to elections, for he holds the heart of kings in his hand and turns them wherever he wills. It is not a leader's charm that secures their throne. It is the decree of the Almighty. It is not their armies, not their wealth, not their alliances. Those are but vapor in the presence of the one who speaks worlds into existence. If he desires to lift a shepherd boy to the seat of power, he will do it. If he determines to bring a mighty ruler low, no scheme, no counsel, no defense will stop it. And yet, He gives time. He gives warnings. He shows mercy. He sends prophets and dreams and signs. He waits. He pleads. He calls. But when the call is ignored, when mercy is mocked, when his name is profaned and his covenant broken, then comes the hand that removes, not in rage, but in righteousness, not in haste, but in holiness. He removed kings who called themselves gods. He brought down empires that claimed eternity. He shattered towers that reached toward heaven in arrogance, and he still does. For he has not surrendered his throne. He is not watching history. He is writing it. And in the silence that follows the fall of the mighty, he speaks again, not to flatter, but to remind, I am the Lord. I lift up whom I will. I bring down whom I will. I do all things for my purpose, and none can stay my hand. I continue with the call to return. There comes a time when all that has been hidden is brought to light, when all that has been ignored demands an answer. That time is the reckoning. It is not born of chaos, though it may look chaotic. It is not the product of man's wrath, though it may come through human hands. It is the appointed moment when heaven calls a nation or a leader or a people to account. The reckoning does not arrive unannounced. It is preceded by mercy. It walks behind patience. It follows warnings. But when it comes with weight, with precision, with justice. The balances are taken from the throne room of God, and the deeds of men are weighed, not according to culture, not by public opinion, but by the standards of righteousness. The man who stood in power believed himself untouchable. For a season, it seemed that nothing could remove him. Scandal passed, storms came and went. He stood, and the people marveled. But heaven had not forgotten. God had seen the compromise, the corruption, the pride cloaked in religious language, and the cup was being filled slowly, deliberately, with every unrepentant act, every defiant word, every exaltation of self over the fear of the Lord. The reckoning did not begin with shouts, but with silence, a stillness that signaled the end of divine patience. The hands of the clock reached the hour. The decree was issued in the courts of heaven, and what had been tolerated for a season would be tolerated no more. The same hand that had once lifted now moved to strike, not to destroy for destruction's sake, but to cleanse, to purge, to awaken. It was not only about a man, it was about the nation he led. For God deals with nations as he does with individuals. He calls them, he warns them, he blesses them, and when they turn, he judges them. The reckoning was not cruelty, it was consequence. It was the echo of every dismissed prophet, every silenced voice of truth, every act of rebellion covered in the name of progress. In the reckoning, falsehoods are exposed, alliances unravel, the house of cards collapses. Those who once cheered now turn, those who once followed now flee. The image shatters, the platform crumbles, and the hand of the Lord is unmistakable. But the reckoning is not just for leaders. It is for the people who follow them, for the culture that exalts them, for the generation that inherits their decisions. It is a holy confrontation. It asks the question no one wants to answer. What have you done with what I gave you? It is not political. It is not about left or right. It is about right and wrong, truth and deception, light and darkness. And when that moment comes, no speech can stop it. No strategy can delay it. No amount of power or wealth can buy more time. The time has come. The sword is drawn. The fire is kindled. The reckoning has begun. Would you like me to now expand the call to return? Even in the midst of collapse, there is a voice that speaks, not of doom, but of hope, not of destruction for its own sake, but of redemption waiting in the ashes. For the God who judges is also the God who restores. He tears down what is corrupt, but only to build again what is true. He removes what is defiled, so that what is holy can rise. Hope does not come after the fall. It is born within it. It rises like a whisper in the rubble. It is found not in the towers of pride, but in the hearts that have been broken. When all else fails, when the systems collapse, when the leaders fall, when the illusions shatter, what remains is the opportunity to return, to begin again, to remember what was forgotten. This is the mercy of judgment. that it is not final unless we make it so. The very act of shaking is also an invitation. The removal of the unclean makes room for the holy. And when the mighty fall, it is not merely to bring justice, but to awaken a sleeping people, to bring a nation to its knees, not in defeat, but in surrender. Hope does not dwell in the throne of a man, nor in the platforms of politics, nor in the strength of empires. It dwells in the heart that turns. It lives in the secret place where a soul cries out for mercy. It takes root when the proud become humble, when the strong admit their weakness, when the rebellious remember their Creator. Even as the voice of power was silenced, a greater voice began to rise, not from the palaces, but from the prayer closets. Not from the heights, but from the depths. A remnant began to cry out. They had seen the signs. They had heard the warnings. And now, in the wake of judgment, they sought the face of the one who still held the future. Because there is always a remnant, always a seed, always a root that remains, hidden under the ground, waiting for the rain. And when it comes, when the turning begins, then hope bursts forth like spring after winter. The land may have been scorched, but it is not dead. The throne may be empty, but heaven is not. The world may shake, but the foundation of the Lord stands firm. Hope is not the absence of judgment. It is the purpose behind it. It is the heart of God calling his people back. It is the voice that says, even now, return to me. It is the promise that what was lost can still be restored, that the fall is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a greater one. And would you like the full speech compiled now from all expanded sections? And there are moments in history, fleeting yet profound, when the veil between the natural world and the spiritual realm is pulled back, just enough for us to glimpse what is unfolding in the unseen. A vision was given, not in words, but in a silence that spoke louder than any voice. It was the vision of a mighty one, exalted and lifted high, but whose fall had already been decided before he ever took his throne. The image was not a grand spectacle, but rather the quiet removal of one whose time had come. It was not the collapse of a kingdom, but the unraveling of an illusion. For a moment, everything appeared as though it was secure. Rulers paraded in power, cities standing strong, nations united in force. But in the divine courts of heaven, the decision had been made, and it would unfold in due time, beyond the reach of any earthly power or strategy. The man stood there, unaware of the imminent shift that would take place in the heavenly realms, blind to the fact that his foundation had already been cracked, that his grip on power was only temporary. Heaven had marked the day and the hour, and in its due time, he would be moved from power, not by the strength of his enemies, not by force of arms, but by the will of God. The vision wasn't about the collapse itself. It was about what was happening behind the scenes, about the profound moment when heaven's judgment was made manifest in the earth. When the fall comes, it does not happen suddenly. There are signs before the final collapse, and yet, even those who walk in pride often fail to see the weight of their own arrogance. For those who sit high and exalted, there is often a blindness that comes with power. They forget that the same hand that lifted them up can also bring them low. This is the story of all those who have risen to great heights without remembering that their rise was not by their own strength, but by the will of a higher power. Their greatness was only ever on loan, given to them for a time, a season. The mighty fall not because their enemies are stronger, but because their pride has grown beyond measure and their hearts have turned away from humility. Throughout history, we have witnessed such falls. Leaders who believed themselves untouchable. Kings who thought their power was absolute. Pharaoh, who defied the God of Israel, met his end when the very sea swallowed him whole. Nebuchadnezzar, who exalted himself above the heavens, was humbled and driven to live as a beast of the field. Herod, who took the praise of men and received it as his own, was struck down by the hand of God. Between his brow, these were not mere stories, they were divine warnings, signs that power without humility leads to ruin. The fall of the mighty is never as swift as it seems. It is the result of 1,000 small decisions, of an unchecked heart, of a spirit that no longer fears the one who gave it power. The fall of the mighty is the inevitable consequence of pride, and once the descent begins, it cannot be stopped, for heaven has already made its judgment. What was once exalted becomes a reminder of the frailty of human strength and the weight of God's justice. There is always a stirring, a subtle warning that many fail to recognize. The signs are often quiet at first, whispers in the wind, shifts in the atmosphere, a sense of unrest that grows in the spirit. They are not always obvious to the world, but they are clear to those who are awake. The world moves forward, blind to the signs, while those with spiritual discernment begin to notice the cracks in the foundation. It begins with small tremors, shifting alliances, subtle changes in behavior, whispers of betrayal, but then the tremors grow. What was once stable begins to wobble, and those who stand upon it are unaware of the ground shifting beneath their feet. The people begin to feel it. There is a sense of unease in the air. The promises of security begin to feel empty. The assurances of power begin to ring hollow. And in the midst of all this, there are those who begin to cry out, those who hear the warnings, those who see the signs, those who can sense that something is changing. But their voices are drowned out, ignored, ridiculed. They are labeled as alarmists, prophets of doom, but they continue to cry because they know that the signs are real. The shaking is not always seen in the external world. It is felt in the spiritual realm, where things once stable begin to falter. The heavens themselves seem to tremble, and the earth begins to groan. The systems that once held the nation together start to come apart at the seams. Natural disasters, economic instability, moral decay, all of these are signs that something is shifting in the heavens. But still, many refuse to see. The signs before the shift are not only warnings, they are invitations. An invitation to return, to repent, to turn back before it is too late. But the world is too busy, too preoccupied, too blinded by its own desires to heed the call. And so the shift continues to come, slow but sure, until it is undeniable. So now we have seen it, the vision, the fall, the signs, the rebellion, the lifting and the lowering, the reckoning and the hope. It was not just a man that was removed, it was a message from heaven, a divine interruption to awaken a sleeping people, to shake us free from illusion, to remind us that no throne is eternal except his, that no name will stand unless it bows before the name above all names. This is the hour to see clearly, to cast off the blindness of pride and return to the fear of the Lord, to fall on our faces, not in shame, but in surrender. The shaking was not the end, it was the beginning, a moment of mercy hidden within judgment, a chance to choose the ancient path again, to seek him not only in crisis, but in covenant. And to every soul who has ears to hear, he is calling, to leaders, to nations, to you. This is the time. This is the voice in the whirlwind. This is the mercy in the shaking. Do not wait for another fall to listen. Return now, while there is still breath, while there is still time. Because the one who removes kings is also the one who restores hearts. The one who judges is the same who redeems, and his arms are still open. Thank you for hearing this word. May it stir, may it awaken, may it lead you not just to understanding, but to him. God bless you.